Welcome back, everyone, to episode 16 of the Minot Business Podcast, presented by Bennett Creative Media. I am your host, Easton Bennett, back with another guest, Eric Nance. How's it going, Eric?
It is going great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's good that you're here. I'm excited about this conversation. We had a little bit of a conversation before we started the pod, but we wanted to save a little bit for the podcast.
I think that's smart.
So for the people, this is kind of what we do. We just get right into the questions. For the people that know nothing about you, have no idea what you do.
Yep.
What do you do? What's your elevator pitch?
Okay, so I am a mental health professional, primarily doing telehealth, which means I see people over a computer. And I found that it's one of the best ways to work with people. It's what we call evidence-based, which means there's research that supports this is a very effective way to work with people. So that's the crux of what I do. However, I have recently got an office space in Minot, and I'm going to see some people in person now too, because I kind of miss that. So now we have this thing called the hybrid, which is part telehealth and part in person. Yeah. So that's where I'm headed. That's what I do.
So are you missing the human experience?
Yes.
Do you call them clients then?
We do. That's a great question. Okay. Yes, clients. Yeah.
So you kind of miss that in person with the clients?
I do. And I think I miss the office kind of camaraderie. I mean, the building I'm going to, there's no other therapist, but I'm going to see people. I'm tired of working at home. I mean, and again, I've done it for 3 years, and it's like, it's time to get out and see people, interact. My podcast guy is upstairs, one flight up, so we'll be in the same space, which is fantastic.
So podcast guy, Jonathan Starr, correct?
Jonathan Starr, yes.
He's a former guest on the podcast. That's actually how we got your name to get you on the podcast. And he was kind of giving me a little bit of rundown. So did you start your company during COVID?
Yes.
Okay. And if so, what made you want to do that? Like, and talk to me about that. Obviously starting some during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had worked for agencies, Easton mental health wise, my entire life. And I thought, I want more control. It was really a control thing. I want to be able to run the whole show. Mm-hmm. And so originally I broke away from my company or my agency, and I was going to go into business with some other folks.
Okay.
And then they told me how much it was going to cost to do the insurance credentialing and the billing and all this. And I said, I can do this all myself.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
A little bit of a...
Yeah.
Hit you like a ton of bricks?
I knew it was going to be difficult to get credentialed on my own, which basically means get your Blue Cross, your Medicare and all that going.
Okay.
But I had no idea how difficult the conversations were going to be with the people I dealt with. It's like speaking a different language. It really is. This is not mental health. This is insurance stuff.
Yeah.
So I felt very dumb. I felt very stupid. There's an old saying that the fool precedes the master. And I really had to succumb to that. So I said, fine, I'll be a student again. I learned how to credential. I learned how to bill insurance, and now I'm running the whole show myself, and I love it.
Okay, so that's a good transition into, in the beginning, what were some of the obstacles? Obviously, that was one of the obstacles when starting your company, but what were some things you ran into where you're like, oh my, I didn't realize it would be like this?
Okay, the biggest one was the whole tax thing. I went and met with my accountant, and when someone's talking to you and they look at you thinking you understand it, but you don't?
Yep,
so
all the time.
Yeah, you sort of put on that air like, I get it. And then she's telling me there's different ways to tax it, LLC versus this. And I'm like, oh my gosh. S Corp, all that. And so I said, you got to stop and let me just absorb this. So finally I began to understand it. And I realized all I really have to know is cash flow, what goes in, what goes out. And they take care of the rest of it. But it's intimidating when, again, it's a whole new language.
Oh, yeah.
And my CPA said, look, you focus on what you're good at. Let us focus on the rest, because I started to obsess.
So is that something at the beginning when I started my company, I was just doing one spreadsheet, and I think I've talked about this on previous episode, but one spreadsheet for here's the invoices, here's what people are paying me. Here are the expenses. Here's what I'm paying for.
Yes.
And then I would hand that over to the client.
Yep.
Is that something that you're doing, or what does your process look like for your accounting side?
So kind of like how I track everything. Well, luckily that is built into what we call an electronic health record. So the one that I go through, it's called Therapy Notes. It tracks everything.
Okay.
Inflow, who owes, or input, who owes what, and balances and all that. Mm-hmm. So I just click on that, and a client gets on the system. They know exactly what they owe every time they come in. So it's great. Yeah.
And that's maybe the importance of, I believe that's probably something like a CRM software, client reputation management or something like that.
I've never heard that term used, but very well could be.
I think it's called a CRM. And the one I use is Studio Ninja, which pretty much is like, hey, here's the workflow of the client. Like, you meet with them, then you send them the proposal, they accept it, they sign the contract, do the work, send the invoice. So I think it's something like that. I could be off on my acronyms. I'm not great.
I just like the fact you said Studio Ninja. That's got a great ring to it.
Yeah, it's good branding by the company. I mean,
wow.
It's mainly targeted towards photographers and videographers, but I know there's a ton for every industry.
Okay, sure.
So have you always been business minded? When did you know that you're interested in starting your own business?
Okay, so great question. Probably about 4 years ago, when I was working for my prior agency, we would get a lot of emails that were just nasty about billing, about what wasn't getting done. Okay. And I thought, I've always been very good with my billing, getting things in on time. I just don't want to deal with that anymore. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to do it on my terms and kind of live and die on my whim as opposed to doing it for somebody else. Yeah. Kind of like we talked about earlier. And I had some doubts because they've always said therapists are not business people, right? Mm-hmm. We're very different. We're too soft-hearted to run a business. People. Absolutely, which is a complete lie. You just have to put on two different hats. Yep. But it was about that time I realized I'm going to be kind of a victim to the system forever. And, I'm in my 40s now. It's probably time to take the leap and do what so many people are afraid to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now that's a good follow-up question. This isn't even on my list.
Yeah.
Being in your 40s, starting a business in your 40s.
Yep.
What is the preconceived notion of people that want to start a business and they think they have to start it early? They think they have to, I have to start a business in my 20s and grow it. How would you tell these people that, okay, starting a business later in life is not necessarily a bad thing?
I would say that, what a great question. Because you know more. And I think failure is a lot easier in your 40s than it is your 20s. See, in my 20s, I knew everything, Easton. I knew everything about everybody. Mm-hmm. And then at age 45, I'm like, I don't know nothing. And so it's a lot easier to make mistakes and fail in your 40s than it is your 20s. Mm-hmm. And that's the best way I can put it. I think courage is also part of it. I was confident, but not courageous, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I'm maybe not as confident, but I'm very courageous. I will do things to make myself uncomfortable because that's how I grow. And nobody likes to be uncomfortable, but you have to grow. And I think you know that too.
Yeah. And I think it's just about the willingness to try.
Correct.
And there's a saying, nothing. So you can always go back, and we talked about this before the podcast too, but you can always go back. Dana White always says you can always go back to being a bellman.
Yeah.
So like, you might as well try. I can always go get a job at, wherever it might be and work a 9 to 5. But if you live with that regret of not trying something, that's when it gets a little hairy.
There's the actor, Michael Caine, the British actor.
Yep.
He said, when I get to the end of my life, I'd rather regret the things I did, not the things I didn't.
Exactly.
And that's exactly how
because I think the things you don't, that's going to be a little bit heavier regret than the things you did. Because at least you tried. As far as, so I did some research on your website a little bit. So you deal with one-on-one clients.
Yes.
And then also you must have presented to a couple groups and done some presentations here and there.
Yeah,
what's the difference between those two? How do you differentiate, what is the strategy for one based on the other?
Okay. So dealing with a client requires a boundary. It requires a profound boundary. I think people often lose sight of that. We're not friends. And yet we have to approach them in such a way where we're friendly enough and we're teaching, we're giving information, but you have to have that mindset. And I work with a population of adults, a lot of them called SPMI, which are people that are very mentally ill and who don't take boundaries so well. And it's really taught me how to have profoundly good boundaries. Now with a presentation, it's a different mindset because that's where I get my high, Easton, is when I'm teaching something. I just want to be well prepared. I want to go on there knowing what I'm talking about. I want to be able to defend it. Okay. Mm-hmm. When you're with a client, you don't have to defend so much. It's a very different space. But doing a presentation, I want to have information that is defensible and can be argued from both sides.
So is that something where people, when you're presenting, they'll come at you like, well, why this? And then you have a response for it? Is that what you mean by defense?
Absolutely. And so let me throw something out there that I didn't think we'd talk about either. Have you noticed in this world, very few people are very good at saying, here's my point, but I understand your point, and I know as much about your point as you do about my point. I don't think we do that very well anymore.
I think people kind of just take it as, okay, well, he said it, so it must be true, or that I'm not going to argue it.
Right. Or people believe they're just right, and there's no reason to. See, I'm a lifelong learner. I believe if you stop learning, you stop growing.
Yeah.
And so every point that I make in a presentation, I will be able to say to you, here's the argument against it. Here's the strongest argument against my point.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, because I always tell myself, you can learn something from every single person you talk to.
Absolutely.
And even if that person might suck and it might be horrible, you can learn something in the negative from it. It's okay, don't act like this or don't do this. So as long as you look at it from the positive light from everyone, I think that's really where the money's made.
I think you're right too. It's very few people, I think, want to do that. Mm-hmm. We're obsessed with being right, I think, at the ultimate cost, even of relationships, which I think is sad.
So what is the importance of relationships for you now that you've started a business?
it's gotten more important than I ever thought. John's constantly telling me, look, you got to form connections here. I'm like, I don't really need connections. Oh, you do.
Yeah.
And so I've reached out through LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm going to hold an open house here in Minot for therapists that are willing to come and, do I think that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah.
You have to do that.
Well, it's a creative way to do things instead of just a traditional, networking event or what it might be.
Absolutely. And I think the mystery was revealed to me when I realized things just don't come to you. You have to put, like we talked about, more effort into it than I ever thought you had to. You have to go grind, and it's tough. It's like having a second job. You've just been doing this.
And that's something, even when the networking side of things, I didn't understand. I don't think anyone really understands that when they start their business, how important it really is. It might be the most important thing in business.
And again, I wouldn't have thought so. I'm sort of like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Just have it there. No, it's not like that at all. And like I've got a speaking engagement in Duluth, Minnesota in the middle of October. And I'm so excited about that because here's a chance to promote the business, promote the podcast.
Yeah.
But it's like these people haven't seen me before,
And talk to a new audience.
Yeah. But when you're just a face on LinkedIn or Facebook, I think it's very tough to really understand the quality of the person, the flavor. So I think presenting gives you a chance to really sell your product even better.
So then that pivots into content creation wise. Why do you think that's important? So you're not just that avatar on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And let me tell you, here's what I think is true. And feel free to debate this with me. When John and I do our podcast work, my first goal is I need to be vulnerable. I need to demonstrate that for my target audience, which is new clinicians and new graduates. Very few leaders, I think, effectively demonstrate vulnerability.
Okay.
And I hate it.
Yeah.
I get so angry at people who will not volunteer their because even in the supervision group I do, where I have these new clinicians, of course I'll be vulnerable. I'll tell you about my screw ups, how I cost the company $1,500 once because they didn't like the way I wrote up a treatment plan. They need to know that stuff. Otherwise, who's going to model for them? It's okay to screw up.
Well, then people think that if you don't have those vulnerabilities, that, okay, this person went through business, they never did anything wrong, they just did it right. So then when people make their own mistakes, they're like, what am I doing wrong? Absolutely.
And so growing up, I was the kind of kid that I was very much in the belief system. They were kind of perfect people. They just do everything right. That was such a stupid way to think. And looking back, I shouldn't say stupid, but it's posturing, I think, a lot of the time. It's just a lot of people don't get challenged, Easton.
Yeah.
At a certain level, the CEO is no longer challenged. And so they feel like everything's great. I want to be challenged. I want to have somebody say, Nance, explain yourself and tell me why you think this.
Yeah. And that's where it's interesting to see the people that make mistakes, because you think about these people like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos. Do they make mistakes? It might not seem like it, but they've got to be making mistakes every single day.
Absolutely. And think about how hard, everybody talks about Elon Musk, how hard his life must be to be one of the only people on the planet that can do what he can do. You think that's not stress? Yeah. Nobody can do rocket science like him.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about he had $35 million left to his name, and I think he put it all into Tesla to keep it afloat. Otherwise, it would have, went belly up and end up now it's worth $1 trillion.
Right.
This is a good question for you because you're obviously in the mental health space. Why is mental health important when owning and operating a business? So this is almost a selfish question for the business owners already out there.
Okay. I can go so many ways with this. Because our work is dangerous. This is something almost no other mental health person will tell you. Our business is dangerous for the following reasons. Everything we do is frontal lobe driven by our brain, our problem solving brain, our problem solving brain. At the end of the day, we have nothing left to give. And there are spouses that aren't so accommodating to a person that doesn't, that hasn't explained it very well. I've watched relationships die because of a mental health person that wasn't able to explain it correctly to their spouse. I've watched people burn out by trying to do too much. I've worked with people that honestly have worked 90 hours a week trying to get all their progress notes done. That's a term we use in mental health. That's notes that we take. And then the work's no fun anymore. And then you're no good for the client.
Yeah.
But no one seems to teach us that going into it. No one says this job. Think about all the other jobs, Easton. Like if you're a timber faller, they tell you it's dangerous.
Yep.
They do. If you're an air traffic controller, they tell you it's dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason in social services, we're afraid to tell people this is dangerous.
It's probably clouded a little bit into people. Is it so people don't decide not to go into the field, or what do you think that is?
Well, I asked a supervisee once, one of my favorites. She just got her PhD. I said, why don't colleges tell people this work is dangerous? She goes, Eric, that kind of Because then we wouldn't go into the field.
Yeah. Because then you'd have no people.
You'd have no people showing up.
Yeah.
But I also think it's this kind of, we sort of trick people into thinking that people are always great to work with.
Yeah.
People are exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm exhausting. Ask John.
Yeah. Well, and I think it all depends on the day, honestly. Sometimes I'm like, I want to be around people. And then other times I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody.
Absolutely. But in mental health, that's all we do is interact, Easton. And
I suppose, you can't really get out of that. I can go sit behind a computer and edit a video for 14 hours.
Absolutely. So no, I tell people, get away from people. Mm-hmm. You know, the wildlife refuge up here by the Air Force Base North, there's hardly anybody out there ever. So when I want to go take a walk, I go there because there's nobody out there.
Yeah.
A couple Air Force guys might run by, but I love it because you're just going to see the birds and the wildlife, and it's great.
So what's the importance of work-life balance as far as being too far in the business and then taking time away? Because I know there have been times when, even doing this podcast, where you get to that point of burnout where you're like, wow, I'm doing too much. What is the importance of taking those steps away?
Well, that this all can come crashing down is when it immediately came to my brain that you have to take it. There's days where I have felt burnt out, and I've told John, because you know the YouTube channel is building, but it's not building at the pace I think it should, which there's my arrogance.
Yeah.
And he's like, you just got to give it time. You know, we have our hands in a lot of different pots here, but I think being realistic and I think being humbled, I think that's how you keep from burning out. If that answered your question.
I think people look at the short-term goals too often too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because, hey, if I need to make this amount of money by 1 year, or if people would set their goals to a longer time frame, I think they would be much more achievable, and many more people would achieve those goals.
Okay, I'm impressed you said that, because very few people, I'm going to say in their 20s that I've talked to, have ever said that, and it's so true, because we are addicted to early success.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Everyone wants that short-term dopamine hit.
Yes, they do. Dopamine.
But even like this, this podcast, you know, when I started this podcast, I was thinking, you know, it's not going to blow up into a nationwide podcast in 50 episodes, right? So I committed in my head. I'm like, hey, I'm going to do 100 episodes no matter what. And even that might be a short-term thing, but that's 2 years of podcasting. Now you could say, I'm going to do 5 years of this podcast and reevaluate from there. But I think if you take your goals and you say, okay, instead of, I want to make $1 million this year, say, okay, I want to be a millionaire by the end of the decade. Right. I think it's much easier to be a millionaire by the end of the decade than it is to have a year long, because your goals change, your processes of what you're doing on the day-to-day change. I think that's very true. I think your value system changes as, 100%. As you're into it. Because I thought, I'm going to be so important. Like, no one knows who you are. Yeah. It's like, come on, you're not going to be the next, you know. And it's a long grind. It is a long grind. And I think people don't like that. You mentioned the dopamine. Can we talk about the dopamine thing for a second? 100%. I realize I'm part of that culture too, because I'm checking my phone. I really didn't realize how much I checked my phone. I check it every 5 minutes when I'm not in with a client. I thought, this is a problem. I'm as addicted as anybody, because you do like that dopamine hit. And someone had done a really good podcast on the whole dopamine issue of that's why we don't enjoy things, because things don't have the gratification anymore, that we have literally rewired our brains. And I thought, this is scary, good stuff. But Apple's not going anywhere. No, exactly. You know, so it's one of those addictions that we kind of tolerate, kind of like alcoholism. And it's like, you don't know it's an addiction until you think about it either. Correct. It's like you probably had that moment. I look at my phone a lot, but when you look at it, if you look at it for 10 hours a day and you're not thinking about it every single time, you don't realize you're really addicted. And there is a difference between saying, I know there's a problem. And so I'm working now to say, no, you're going to check your phone 5 times a day. And once you're up, you're done. And I hate that I have to be that disciplined, Easton. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it is. That's the world we live in. And I even have on if you have an iPhone, you can set it to, you get so much time per app per day. So like, I have my social media apps. I get 2 hours a day to go on them. Okay. Which is a lot for some people, not a lot for others. Right. Every single day, I have to click, okay, ignore, because I'm like, okay, I have to post the podcast clips. I have to do this and this and this. And I'm wasting a lot of time just scrolling mindlessly. But it is at least a mental trigger to think, okay, I've been on here a lot today. Absolutely. And that's, again, I think you're ahead of the game with, as opposed to a lot of people. I'm trying to make it work, but I just keep hitting ignore and ignore and ignore. Well, because it feels good. You know? Somebody might be saying something profound. You know? Same reason we gamble, because that next pull may be the one that, and I get the $1 million. And sometimes, you know what they say, 90% of gamblers quit right before they're about to hit big. That's right. Which is really ironic. Yeah. How did you go about getting some of your first clients? So for the people that are starting, whether it be a service-based business, retail, how do you go about getting those first clients?
Okay. So I was lucky because at my former agency, there was no question they were allowed to just follow me.
Okay.
So I kind of got off on the right foot by virtue of that. My first Minot client, I think, just looked in the, on Google and found me.
Yep.
And most of my referrals locally have been word of mouth, just from friends to friends, and a couple people like the website. I've done almost no advertising. Okay. Now that's
impressive.
It is impressive, but that's going to have to change, I think, now that I'm going to be in person. But usually word of mouth, which is, I appreciate that. That means somebody likes what they're getting.
And that's really, all of these people say, okay, you got to run these ads and create this content. But at the end of the day, I think word of mouth is one of the most powerful marketing and advertising tools there is.
I agree, because it doesn't lie. If somebody says he's a good therapist, whether they think I am or not, when the new person comes in, that's still a very good thing.
Exactly. And that's even like how you got on the podcast, John, is that he'd be great for the podcast. Now that you're here talking, I'm like, he is great.
Well, this is awesome.
He's great at talking. So as far as marketing and word of mouth efforts, overcoming the stigma of therapy being, either scary or a weird conversation to talk about, how do you go about changing that narrative?
Okay. Great question. Can I make it a very complex answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you know what the DSM is?
Probably not.
Okay. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's basically every
Definitely
disorder.
Not.
Okay. Yeah. It's a book that's like 800 pages long, and it's got every diagnosis you could possibly have in mental health. Okay. Anybody reads that book, they're going to find themselves somewhere in there. Okay. Absolutely. I mean, just read the first 20 pages. Like, I have ADHD. I've got major depressive disorder. I think people look at these diagnoses as living, breathing things. Yeah. They're not. What I try to do with every client that comes in, first of all, I say, thank you for being courageous. Thank you for coming in and being vulnerable. And I also tell them a diagnosis, for all intents and purposes, is an insurance reimbursement tool. And I can back this evidence up. Yeah. There are some therapists who would say never diagnose, except only in the most extreme cases, like schizophrenia or bipolar. Okay. And unfortunately, we have to diagnose for insurance to pay. So like I had a client that came in a couple of years ago that just said to me, I want to make sure I'm raising my autistic daughter okay. Okay. That's not a diagnosed thing. That's just, I need some support. And I said, well, do you want to pay out of pocket? Nope. Well, I got to give you a diagnosis. Yeah. Now, is that not a bad system?
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah. But you have to do it.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Because again, Blue Cross, Medicare, these other companies, they're not going to pay you unless you identified a diagnosis.
And no one wants to pay out of pocket.
Of course not.
Why would you?
Why would you want to do that? So that's what I try to do, that it's okay to be here. People will say to me, I don't agree with mental health. What do you mean you don't agree? You don't agree it's real, or you don't agree it's effective? Yeah. And the people that say that usually have never gone to see a therapist. And let's pick on the men, okay? Because I adore my men clients, but it's tough to get them in because they do not want to do this.
Well, I'm sure a lot of them are, they're in their traditional ways of, you just kind of got to deal with it on your own and go through that.
Correct. Or their wife said, I'm going to leave you unless you come in. Yeah. So I work very hard to get the men to be vulnerable because most of them are hurting. Yeah. They just, no one's ever given them the correct mechanism to deal with their pain. Yeah. Okay. So they'll live their entire lives depressed, Easton, some of these men. Oh yeah. So if you can tell them it's okay to be here, you can do wonders.
And that's where I think the narrative is changing a little bit. There's obviously, when I was playing hockey in Canada, there's a Bell Let's Talk Day, which touches on, I think, suicide prevention and that kind of thing. And mental health is okay. Okay. So I think the narrative is changing a little bit from what I've seen in the last few years, but it's, it's still something that can get out there a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think, again, we're also a culture right now that I think is sort of victimizing itself. Everybody thinks every problem is probably bigger than it is. Yeah. And I think the pandemic hasn't helped. I think everything has gone anxiety kind of just rampant. But if you think about it, a lot of problems can probably be solved much more simply than we make them out to be without high-end therapy strategies and all the big techniques. Some people just need to come to grips with their own truths. And that can be a hard thing, but I think a lot can be done with that.
Isn't there a saying, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, keep it stupid, simple, or something like that.
Either way, your point is well taken. Yeah. Not everything has to be complex.
Oh yeah. And even in business, like the way the brain works is, I think about this all the time. Yeah. It's like, if you just think about, okay, it doesn't really matter. I tell myself all the time, okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Because your brain can go so far into the future of, well, what if this happens and then this happens? Correct. And it creates scenarios. And it's like, what if tomorrow I just wake up and I do the 3 tasks that I need to do? Yep. go to sleep, and do it again the next day.
Absolutely.
So that's almost where, when we talked about earlier, it's like having those long-term goals of what am I going to do by the end of the decade compared to what am I going to do on the day-to-day. You need the macro and the micro, where it's like, okay, what do I need to do every single day that gets me to the next day? And then how is that going to get me to the 10-year goal?
How can we get this message out to people? I mean, I love that you're saying all this, because this is the truth of it.
I'll clip it. We'll
post the clip of it. Please do. And I'll post that to our podcast too. Success is a funny thing. And look at today's culture with TikTok and all. Everybody wants everything again. They want fame. They want everything right away. We used to have, when I was growing up, the movie The Wizard of Oz, right? I always use this example with clients. Wizard of Oz came on once a year. Okay. So it was a big deal at our house. We had the kids down the block would come. And so look at nowadays, I can stream The Wizard of Oz 10 different ways on 10 different platforms, just like that. Yeah. But when I was 7 years old, you had to wait a year. And I think
it came back on.
Exactly. Now that may be a goofy example, but it's this idea that you had to pay a price before you had your entertainment, and you got your butt in that seat and you stayed there the entire 2 hours. Everything today seems so easy.
And it's just it's right at your fingertips too.
It is. Yeah.
Which is, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I can Google how to change a tire, but I can also waste 6.5 hours watching people dance on TikTok.
Have you actually done that?
Yeah, actually a couple weeks ago I changed my first tire, which is like, I'll admit it, I'm not that much of a hands-on type of guy. My buddy came over the other day, and he was wearing his work clothes, and he had dirt and mud and grease and everything all over. And I looked at him, I said, "You're dirtier than I've ever been in my life right now." And you know what? That's okay, because I know how to work a power drill, a circle saw or circular saw or whatever, and that's about all.
I'm the same way. I was hanging some pictures. I can use a nail and a hammer pretty well. Yeah. It's when you get into the higher order circular saws. That's
why I just have other people do it.
Absolutely. I'll pay you to make it right.
Exactly. I was shoveling some rocks in my front yard, and I'm like, this is about as far as I'll go with a shovel, I think.
Stay in your lane.
Exactly. So imposter syndrome in a business. Did you suffer from that at all when you're starting?
I still do.
Okay.
Every day I wonder if I know what I'm doing. Yeah. I sometimes wonder why people come and see as therapists, it's different though, because therapists are really bad at this. And here's why. Unlike a house builder that gets to step back and see the result of what they did. Yep. We don't get that. Okay. Even when clients are discharged, they're not fixed. Yeah. Because problems don't go away. So that's the hard part about my job, is when I close people out or when we agree therapy is over, they still have a lot of growing to do. So I live in a job of unfinished. Yeah. And so, of course, I'm wondering, do I know what I'm doing? No one's ever said to me.
It's just a progress mover, a needle mover.
Yes.
Okay.
I sometimes wonder, would I be happier building homes where I could at least get back and say, hey, that's what I built up on the hill right there. Yeah. We don't get to do that.
Or start a lawn mowing company.
Or work in the oil fields. I mean, the work is done for that day. So imposter syndrome hits me every day. Now with the business, because I have this deep down belief that I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
So how do you overcome that then? How do you overcome day-to-day imposter syndrome?
I take the risk. I show up every day. And I let the feedback that I get run the day.
And that's maybe something where it is. You just got to show up every day.
Absolutely. And I know this is cliche, I get it, but if you show up to your job every day, okay, it will make a difference. Yeah. It's the people that decide they're not going to do it. And that's where they say history favors the brave. Showing up is so powerful. I can't even tell you, even if I look stupid, if I'm there will be value.
And I think that's the one thing I always have to tell myself, because a lot of times there's things I don't want to work every day. Right? People say you're in a passion, you don't work a day in your life. I don't think that's true.
Not at all.
But there's a lot of times when I wake up and I was like, I don't want to edit videos today, or I don't want to film anything today. But if you start, the momentum starts going. And I think that's why, I make my bed every day. If you get that one thing under your belt, it kind of gives you momentum into the next task.
I agree.
Do you believe that?
You're hitting the right notes today, which I appreciate, because a good friend of mine who helped me with some business strategies said, with your business, what you have to do is set aside time every day to do something. So what I do is, like my presentation I'm working on, just put aside an hour a day. Just put aside, it's amazing what you could do if you just put aside an hour as opposed to thinking about it for 8 hours. And so that's how I kind of do it. But I think too, getting up, making your bed, cleaning up my kitchen, all of these things give you an energy that is very powerful.
It's just taking that first 10 seconds to just think, okay, and even getting out of bed in the morning, just get up, stand there, don't go back into bed.
Correct.
Whatever it might be.
I have those days too. I'm like, if I can just get to my coffee, if I can just get to Mr. Coffee,
if I can meander down the hallway, pop it in the Keurig, I will be so good.
Yes. And that's how you have to do it some days. Have you seen the movie The Martian?
I have. It's actually one of my favorite movies. I told my dad to watch it for like 2 months. He wouldn't watch it just because I kept telling him to watch it. He finally watched it.
It's such a great...
I love that movie.
Well, there's this line at the end, and I can't quote it verbatim, but Matt Damon says, there's going to be a point where you're going to face these odds, and that's going to be the end of you, basically. Yeah. You can either accept that or get to work. You solve one problem, and you solve another. I thought, man, that is great.
And that's where, because he solves a lot of problems in that movie.
Yes, he does. We won't get into the maybe details, but he certainly does.
Yeah, tune into the movie podcast.
Please do.
Couple more questions here for you. How did you go about funding your business? So I know a lot of people at the beginning, some people take out huge loans and they got this brick and mortar and they got to do this. Some people go really lean. Yep. What did your scenario look like?
It's very easy because it was all digital. So really all I had to pay for was, internet and my electronic health record to go with it. It was easy, Easton. I mean, there was not a lot more that I had to do. Yeah. So as far as that, there was almost nothing I had to put into it.
So what would you say to people that are starting a business and they think, because a lot of people, and maybe it's transitioning a little bit with the day and age we're in, but a lot of people think, I need this business plan and I need this and I need money and I need people to work for me. How would you tell those people, okay, you can start it on your own?
I would say, and again, a great question. The best laid plans. Okay. You can kind of come at that perspective, but that sounds really rigid to me.
Yep.
I would go back to talk to people that have done it. Mm-hmm. Talk to people. There's an old saying too, that the experts are the best people to go to. Pick the people that are winning at what you want to do and say, how did you do it?
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to do it.
And I think people are scared to ask.
Oh, I think they are too. But why are they scared to ask?
Mentors and people you can ask are almost like a cheat code in business.
I agree. So why are we so afraid of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But before I had any business plan, I would say, let's talk to somebody that's done it. Mm-hmm. That helped me a lot.
Yep. But no, that's like something, even when I started, Adam's behind the cameras here, and he helped me a ton because he had already been in the game for however long. So even just picking his brain about how would you do this? How would you do that? Like it's so beneficial in any industry you're in.
Absolutely.
How are you looking to grow your business day after day? Are there certain steps you're taking?
Well, okay. So the podcast and the YouTube channel are kind of separate from the business, but I look at them as an extension. Okay. And again, right now I'm in the process of forming connections in Minot. I'm actually going to join the Lions Club, which is there you go. Long story there. But that's really the goal, is to get my, not my name out there. I'm tired of that phrase, meeting people and letting them know what I'm about. So another therapist can say, okay, I think he'd be a good fit for this person or this person.
Just knowing you exist.
Just knowing I exist, knowing what my niche is. That's the word we like to use. Yep. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to invite them to come and see me. And
that's awesome. I'm excited to see how that goes.
Thank you. Thank you.
2 more questions here for you.
Yeah, no, this is
what
great.
Do you enjoy about the business process? What's your favorite part?
Of just the business?
Yes.
Gosh, it's going to sound odd, but the uncertainty. Mm-hmm. The fact that I never quite feel comfortable that I'm going to make it.
And that's where something, you almost got to, when you start feeling comfortable, that's when things are allowed to go bad.
Correct.
I always say.
Correct.
You got to do something. If I start feeling too comfortable, I do something out of the norm. Start a podcast, start doing something else, try a different industry, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Jordan Peterson, one of my favorite psychologists, he's kind of a polarizing figure, but he said, if in any task you have to be a little uncomfortable, because if you're too comfortable, it won't mean anything. If it's too uncomfortable, you won't do any of it. You have to kind of hit that sweet spot where it's just a little uncomfortable.
No man's land.
But yeah, exactly.
So what would be your Mount Rushmore of business advice? This is a question I like to ask. Top 4 pieces of advice. What would those be?
Okay, well, here it goes. You want me to give 4?
Yep.
All right. The first one is number 1, be willing. I want to stay away from terms that are going to tick people off.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to say it like this: be willing to be uninformed. Be willing to start as an uninformed person. Okay. I think you have
like you don't know anything.
Like you don't know anything.
Okay.
Number 2, carve out time to put into what you're doing. You have to carve it out. Even if it's an hour a week, do something to keep it going.
For your specific profession.
Absolutely. But I think for any profession, I think that's, or who's
for
trying
like their specific.
Absolutely.
So if you're video, learn how to do more video.
Absolutely.
Therapist,
yes.
Research, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And again, embrace failure. I think we don't do that enough. Embrace failure.
Oh yeah.
I do. I fail every day at something.
That's where you grow. Failure's where you grow.
Completely. And last thing I would say, and this is actually a book with this title, Surrender the Outcome. Surrender the outcome.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means that you and I have no control over what happens after we do the work. None.
That's true. I like that.
It is true.
There's a lot of, sometimes I tell it to my sister when she asks me things, and I always say, is it going to change? If you can't change that, like not change the outcome, I'm saying that because you just said it.
Right,
but if you can't change what's going to happen, then why worry about it?
Right.
Because you can't fix it. You can't make it worse. Yep. You can't make it better. Just forget about it and just let whatever happen.
It seems so easy when we say it like that, but people here's the thing. I think people put in work, and I've been the victim of this too. We want a good result. It's like, why are we putting all this work in?
Yeah.
Well, that's the way it works. I'm sorry. Again, it's not going the way you see in my imagination. I'm already a rock star, Easton, right? And I'm not, but I'm willing to keep going through the suffering and the work because I'm going to learn something about myself, about my business, about people. But I've surrendered the outcome, which means if this fails, so be it. Yeah.
And I think that's where the cliche saying is, enjoy the journey, not the destination.
Correct.
What is your North Star? Do you have a North Star? Is it the therapy world? Do you have any other things that you want to dive into?
Well, I'll say this. Every therapist does things differently. I've met 1,000 therapists in my life. But I would hope that what I do with people is really give them an individual experience. I really want to tailor what I do to meet the needs of the person I'm working with. But I want to do the same thing when I present too. I really, and I'm a huge geek. I mean, if you saw my office and all my figures, you'd be like, wow, he's 7 years old.
Yeah.
But it's play. It's when I've had, I work with suicidal people. That's tough.
Yeah.
I like knowing that I can go to an area of play because play is a great way to offset tragedy.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's my final piece of advice to therapists is play more. We don't play enough.
I like that.
Yeah.
Don't have to take everything so serious.
Not at all. I saw your posters out there. I mean, that's play. That is exactly what it is.
Oh yeah. For the people that don't know, I have movie posters hanging in my hallway and I love them. Yeah. They're 4 stupid movies, but they're awesome. Eric, where can people find you on the internet?
Okay. pathwaystoyoullc.com is our website. And then our YouTube channel, if you just go to YouTube, it's Dark Side of Therapy. Just type in Dark Side of Therapy. Perfect. And we'll be there.
Cool. We'll link those below so you guys can check those out.
Awesome.
Eric, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was a good one. I'm sure we could have rambled for a lot longer.
I think we could talk for 10 hours, but we have a life, don't we? But no, I really appreciate being here, Easton. Thank you.
That is episode 16 of the Minot Business Podcast presented by Bennett Creative Media. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week for episode 17.